Oh, hello. I didn't know you were coming over. I'm glad you did, though. I would like to have a discussion with you and some friends about a topic that's of great interest to me, and I think it is of great interest to you as well. While Seattle is known today for its coffee, natural beauty, and thriving music scene, that was not always the case. The natural beauty has always been there, and coffee came later on, but a music scene built on original songs took a lot longer. All of this was happening with far different means of connection than exist today, and as a result, trends and styles took longer to develop nationwide. This was especially true for Seattle, the city that most bands would skip when doing their West Coast tours, unless they were bands from Vancouver or Portland. Despite this, one man's relentless energy and determination to create helped spawn the rise of Seattle's original music scene. The man of discussion here is Tomata. Born David Xavier Harrington in New York State in 1948, Tomata had a massive impact on the Seattle music scene, particularly the adoption of original material. In fact, as you'll come to hear, without Tomata, there is a good chance Seattle's independent music scene would never have evolved the way that it did. Some key elements to pay attention to here are Tomata's widespread effect on the American punk scene, and knowing what we do now, how different things are described from how they are today. As they say, it was a different time, but the same place. Let's listen now to some discussions featuring early Seattle scene members. What year did you move back to Seattle?
69,
Okay.
and that's about the time I met Tomata.
Okay.
He was part of the Whiz Kids, and they were, one of my co-workers was a Whiz Kid. And we kind of started hanging out together. We had houses that were group homes. Savage Vaginas, House of Leather, Harlow House, Lavender Shadows. These were all on Capitol Hill before it became such a mecca. It was very mixed at that time and a little spooky and dangerous, but we all lived together in communal living.
He'd been around San Francisco with the Cockettes.
Tomata was influenced a lot by the Cockettes.
And just doing stuff way back. He said he knew Dee Dee when he was in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like in probably 69 or 70.
In fact, when he came up here from San Francisco, he had been up here before, but he went back down there and performed with the Cockettes for Tricia Nixon's wedding, which had Sylvester and a whole bunch of other Cockettes. Mm-hmm. Photographs of that as well, but that was, I think, part of the spark for him as well, mm-hmm. being in that group.
Already we can see Tomata has found art as his avenue, and having left a thematic and performative group in San Francisco for a new life in Seattle, it was only a matter of time before magic would happen again. Upon settling in Seattle, Tomata formed the Whiz Kids, which was Seattle's most influential pre-punk musical group. The Whiz Kids were more of a performance group than a musical group, however, although music was a component for sure. While their wild outfits made many assume all were homosexuals, that was not the case. But again, the times were different, and that type of public display was less common. The Whiz Kids were a group for people who were into the New York Dolls and T-Rex, an offbeat cast of people that just wanted to be wild and have fun. The Whiz Kids also served as a transitionary group from the hippie to punk movement. Let's now listen to the same guys from before talk about the Whiz Kids and their influence. So, sort of going back in time because of that same experience of like, oh, seeing people do this, then I can do it too. The Whiz Kids are regarded in that same way, where they like sparked creative interest among people and said, you can be weird, you can dress strangely and do all that stuff. What are your thoughts on that?
The Whiz Kids, of course, were complete gay glam. Mm-hmm. It was yeah, it was just, you know, not trying to fit in, not trying to be a credit to in the straight world, just, yeah, being weird, being creative, being themselves, and making art at the same time.
The Whiz Kids were into costuming and theatrics and presentation as well as music. And so, you know, there were people who might have been painters, or, you know, it sort of drew from a bunch of different places in the artistic community, writers and, you know, photographers and sculptors and, you know, people who were just creative. And, you know, all of these people just kind of gravitated to it, you know, whether it's the TMT show or the Bird, or, you know, that's how the whole thing sort of started to come together.
So how about the Whiz Kids? Did you ever see them perform? Did you ever see them about town?
The who?
The Whiz Kids?
Oh, yeah, I saw them perform. There was a thing at the Oddfellows Hall, some of the real early self-produced shows up on Capitol Hill. I saw them up there. And they were pretty eye-opening too. It's like, dang, you know, this is crazy. I like it.
The Whiz Kids were outrageous. I mean, they were street performers. They were guerrilla street performers. They would interrupt events while in costume. And in costume, I mean, they weren't drag. In fact, drag queens hated the Whiz Kids because we were more satire, more outrageous than wanting to look like a female, and they hated us.
No, the Whiz Kids had a weekly gig
Oh, okay.
in their rehearsal space, which was in on the same block as Smith Tower, Seattle's oldest skyscraper.
Aha. That's right. Didn't they perform at like the basement of that?
Yeah,
Or,
yeah,
I may have read that in Loser. I can't remember.
yeah.
Stats got a hold of the manager of the Smith Tower and started being a bartender in the basement of the Smith Tower, which is we call the Paradise Room. And that's where the Whiz Kids started performing legitimately. And then they got to the point where they were actually able to book Eagles, and we performed with Alice Cooper and the New York Dolls. The posters down my hall are from those events. I was more of a backstage guy.
Okay.
And only performed 3 or 4 times. But I was probably the only person who was working who could afford to help them out when they needed costumes. The very first performance at Sky River, and the Whiz Kids were almost killed.
Wow.
They were performing, and they had a lot of bikers there, and they had a very big penis, paper mache, and they sprayed foam out into the audience from the head of the penis, and the bikers almost came together.
Were you aware of the Whiz Kids growing up?
Yeah, my older brother, Charlie Price, briefly played in Z Whiz Kids. He had a bass that somebody gave him, but he's not really a musical guy. More like, I think he just kind of stood around on stage and did weird stuff. I never saw him.
Okay. So were they were they a significant influence across like all of Seattle as far as music, or was it more narrow to like the attendees, or?
They were pretty narrow. Glam, and avant-garde, scene. Well, they were not widespread at all.
Yeah, they were more like theatrical than they were musicians, right? Or
Yeah. But they were, as far as the music scene goes, everybody knew them. And they were influential, I would say. But, you know, this is 1975, 1976, when the punk rockers were more like hunted animals on the streets of Seattle.
sure.
This is the New York Dolls poster and Fabulous Pickle Sisters, which were an ad hoc group of women that were really fun. It was amazing that it was actually produced by Albatross. That was probably the peak of their time as a group. They convinced people at the office at the theaters to allow them to perform when someone came to town, like Alice Cooper. This one is to Rio de Janeiro, who was one of the original of the Tupperwares. Very nice. They were pretty funky at times too, like Lay Me Down and Knock Me Up. That was and live on tape. They were outrageous. I keep saying they.
They as in the Whiz Kids, or they as in
The Whiz Kids.
Yeah.
We performed in a lot of the bars down in town. Doubleheader. Back in the day when downtown was before the Kingdom,
Okay.
and it was where all the gay bars were,
Oh.
including the Smith Tower. Feels so good going down. One of the earliest performances was actually at the University of Washington Student Union building.
Was there a big division between like the gay and straight scene at the time? Were the Whiz Kids like sort of outcasted or shunned by others?
No.
Or okay.
We were hippies. Basically, the Summer of Love had passed us by, and Tomata brought up the Whiz Kids, but we were still in transition between hippie and punk. So we were kind of the bridge between the two genres.
If anything, it was the transition from, you know, being hippie bands to being colorful in some way or another.
Sats, Veloud, Satin Sheets was his Whiz Kid name.
Okay.
It's now known as Sats. I used to hang out with him whenever he came to Seattle to perform, but after the first song I usually left. The city had us segregated, but there were like 6 bars downtown around the Smith Tower, Paradise, that had Go-Go Boys and at 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the morning. But the city kept us there because that's where also in the early jazz days of Seattle, that's where the black jazz clubs and the music scene was in Pioneer Square. But then they built the Kingdom, and they pushed us all out and up to Capitol Hill.
That's where the history of that is, like a gay neighborhood began.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, like, so what do you know about the Whiz Kids? Did you ever see them play around
I
town?
did.
Oh, nice.
I did. I saw him play at Washington Hall. So there was a place up on Capitol Hill where all those alternative shows were playing, all the punk shows, and it's just.
But what about the Whiz Kids? Like, where did you see them? What were their performances like?
So they were, they did some Bowie stuff. So
they actually played music. They weren't just like a theater troupe.
Oh no, they actually played music.
Okay.
Yeah, so there was actually parts where they would play music, and they were super drag, super. I think they were more super glam than drag. Because everybody was bending, the realities of what we were at. It's like we had just come out of this, like, the hippie era, and didn't really know where we were going as kids. I started dyeing my hair different colors, which at the time, would get me either like a couple of times spit on.
Wow.
And it's like, and then invariably, someone would start using slurs, and say, call me a fag and all that stuff, and I'm just going, it's just me. I'm okay.
Yeah. So Michael Campbell and Kurt Bloch sort of both agreed, like, the Whiz Kids were sort of the transitionary group from hippie to punk.
Absolutely. So there was another band prior that was a band, less theatrics, called Scott Free.
And what were they all about?
They were definitely all about, Ziggy Stardust and, all the Bowie type stuff, and they were playing like T-Rex, all the stuff that nobody else was playing at the time.
Okay.
Scott Free was a separate thing. It wasn't. Those guys weren't part of the Z-Whiz Kids.
Did they?
But they knew each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
They didn't like stop Scott Free and then become Whiz Kids.
No.
Okay.
No. So two separate entities. Two separate groups.
Okay. While the Whiz Kids were very influential to many of the early Seattle scene members and founders of the independent music scene, not all were impressed. Let's listen to a few differing views.
I mean, when I said people called us whiz kids, it was kind of a derogatory term that people used. We were fags, and even though we all had girlfriends, we were all heterosexual, but we were called fags because we wore unusual clothes. Are we still on?
Yep, we're rolling.
The early 70s, I think all the New York Dolls theory comes from one location, which is Z-Whiz Kids, or always, oh yeah, they were heavily influenced by the New York Dolls. Honestly, I never saw them, but I think that might have more, I think it was less important to the Seattle music scene than anybody might think. As far as I know, growing up sort of parallel to that, there wasn't really, like, I never saw Z-Whiz Kids. There's a recording of them opening for Alice Cooper in 1971 at the Paramount, and they have nothing to do with New York Dolls or rock kick-ass music in any way. It's like a 50s sort of troupe of, it's not really rock and roll. It has nothing in common with that. And the fact that they opened for the New York Dolls later, did they turn into more of a rock band? There's no recordings of them really. I think they would be more interesting to the people who were looking at the New York fashion side of things and stuff like that. As far as I can tell, they had zero impact on Seattle music.
The Whiz Kids served as like a transitionary group from hippies to punks.
And I can imagine that, but we never saw them. We never even heard of them. You know, they had zero impact on anything we did. Where would we have seen them? You know, they didn't have a record out. They didn't play. They didn't ever played at the Bird. They never did anything. I mean, I'm not saying that they're not important to some people, but from our standpoint, they were a non-entity. We always heard about the Screamers, but the Screamers did maybe one Seattle show. Okay, that's cool. You know, so it was not really, you know, in no way. I mean, you listen to the tape of the Whiz Kids opening for Alice Cooper, and it's like, in no way is this influential in any way to anything. It's like a Broadway troupe, you know, miming to 50s songs or something like that. It's like, this is all that it was. You know, and I'm sure, you know, of course I didn't see the 75 New York Dolls show either, so I don't know if they'd come a little ways since then or what they were doing really. And some of those people who were in that did other things that were notable, but only in a past tense sort of thing. It's like the Tupperwares and the Screamers and the things like that. You know, none of those bands were, you know, moved a needle as far as having recordings out or playing enough shows to be visible or anything like that. So I think it might be a little erroneous to have that be any sort of, you know, ground zero as far as punk music or anything like that.
The circle that I ran with weren't so heavily influenced by them, but I know, you know, that I'm sure they did have a wide effect because they were real groundbreakers, you know, in a lot of ways.
As you may have noticed, as was mentioned earlier, the Whiz Kids were more of an idea than they were an actual group entity. They let others know that it was okay to dress strangely or against the mass of others, that it was okay to be weird. The Whiz Kids gave artistic kids all around Seattle the motivation to do their own thing, start their own groups, be their own people. The Whiz Kids, while outwardly feminine in an exaggerated, outrageous form, were not made up of gay men alone. There were many heterosexuals who were simply attracted to the outrageousness and anti-establishment nature of the group. It was this inspiration that the Whiz Kids provided that encouraged people of all stripes to create original content. Whether that was music or some other kind of art was less important. While the Whiz Kids did do this as an entire group, that energy would never have come to be without the fervent energy of Tomata DePlenty. Tomata left the Whiz Kids in 1973 to head to New York City's Bowery and became a figure in CBGB's original scene. Tomata hung out with all of the key figures, Debbie Harry, the Ramones, and Talking Heads. Tomata came back to Seattle with all of what he had learned at CBGB's and then took his energy to LA with the Tupperwares and then the Screamers. Let's listen to the same guys from before discuss Tomata DePlenty as a key motivator for entire music scenes after his work with the Whiz Kids.
He's the most influential single person that I ever met. Mm-hmm. And for the Seattle scene, how his presence and just his influence on the Seattle scene can't be overstated. I mean, it just can't.
Yeah.
You know, it's just huge.
And so he just had a way of getting people excited and germinating ideas and then just doing it.
I think Tomata was probably the best frontman of any punk band around. Mm. Even today, I think Neil Hubbard, who's very much involved in the music scene with his magazines, said he was the best frontman.
I don't give a fuck what anybody says. Without Tomata de Plenty, the Seattle music scene, the trajectory of the Seattle music scene would have been totally different, and there might not have even been a trajectory.
And his personality was just like bombastic. He was so out front, but so kind and gentle.
With
The Whiz Kids and all that stuff.
I mean, they were much more worldly. I mean, they were doing stuff around Seattle. They had their own scene, and you know, the Screamers were older than us. I would say probably at least 5 years older, maybe a little more. And so we were kind of aware of them, but after the whole meeting up with the TNT show is like, oh, you just live down the street. Okay. So it was much more friendly, and you know, their scene was not our scene, but it commingled and overlapped many times. And as more of us graduated from high school, the scene blended more. You know, because the gay scene was understated as far as I could tell, and you know, but everyone knew where the hangouts were. Everyone knew the clubs, and so, but it was still sort of underground.
Sure.
And people didn't feel, you know, comfortable unless they were like really, you know, out there. And then they left. They went down to LA.
Because, and Art said he was like, kind of like the Pied Piper of punk or something, and I thought it's a little bit more like Johnny Appleseed, because he was in New York, he was in Seattle, he was in San Francisco, he was in LA, I think he was in Atlanta or someplace, Florida after that, I'm not sure.
I loved, also kind of influenced by Tomata, I loved some of the theatrical stuff that, you know, some bands more than others. They've got kind of a theatrical thing going on.
I mean, while he was in New York, he was able to program or book CBGBs.
Yep. And he was hanging out with the Ramones and
Oh yeah,
and Talking Heads, like all of them.
all of them, and the rumor has it that when Deborah Harry walked in with the stilettos, he yelled out, "Hey Blondie!" And that's how they got that name, Blondie.
Wow.
But he saw what was happening with punk and came out here to try and get it going in Seattle with the Tupperwares, but decided to move to LA. And that's history. Now, I think he gave everyone in Seattle the opening that they needed to become Seattle's punk. I think he was the guy that showed what it could be like and attracted a lot of followers and a lot of musicians. And he was the godfather, for me, to my understanding, of Seattle's punk scene. After Tomata left, the Whiz Kids went glam. And that didn't last very long. The Tupperwares formed after Tomata was in New York before they went to LA. The Tupperwares had to stop using the name because of Tupperware. Tomata wasn't much of a druggie. He didn't do a lot of drugs.
Were drugs a heavy component of the Whiz Kids?
No, drugs were not a heavy component. I mean, individually, people would get high, but no one was a junkie.
Sure.
No one was a junkie. And this is one of the more famous posters. It was one of probably the first punk performance or punk shows in town. And with the Telepass and the Enemy, $4, big time.
It was after that show that the Tupperwares decided to move to LA, and then they became the Screamers and so on and so forth. And Rio left the band shortly after they moved down there, and they hired a couple of LA guys and became the Screamers. So and they were actually real instrumental in the LA punk scene, because I lived in LA for 7 years, from '85 to '92, and I met a lot of the people that were around in that time, and they all credit the Screamers for being like the band that really kind of got the LA punk scene going at this club called The Mask. And bands like the Germs and a whole variety of others kind of came out from that club, but the Screamers kind of got that place kind of going.
From the efforts of Tomata to Plenty and the Whiz Kids, other artists around town got the confidence to make their own music. Coincidentally, many of these artists happened to go to Roosevelt High School. A few musicians from Roosevelt in particular really helped launch the music scene at their school, and it just so happened that they were all friends as well. Neil Hubbard of Engram Records, Paul Hood of The Enemy, Jim Bassnight of the Moberlys, and Chris Crass of the Vanes all went to Roosevelt High School together and were all friends. Let's listen to them talk about their early experiences with music and what significance Roosevelt High School played in their development.
I went to Roosevelt High School, though, which was, you know,
The music epicenter.
the music epicenter, apparently.
Yeah.
But at that time, I was going to Roosevelt High School, which is, you know, we call it rock and roll high school because it created a lot of great musicians that went on. Some went on to fame and fortune. Some went on to more just, you know, underground legends and things like that. So I went to school with like El Duce of the Mentors. He was a real good friend. Jim Bassnight of the Moberlys. I didn't know him that well, but went to school with Mike McCready. He had a band called Shadow that practiced down the streets from one of my bands that I played in that I'll get to later.
So are you from Seattle?
Yes, I am born and raised.
Okay, where'd you go to school?
I went to Roosevelt High School, and I grew up in Laurelhurst in Seattle. Roosevelt had a lot of musicians in the Seattle scene, for sure. And like, for instance, Sir Mix-a-Lot, Anthony Ray. He was a year ahead of me. And so a rapper in there, in the part of the scene there. And the influences of that, the people there is what brought me into me playing in music, is because of the older guys, and I was like, wow, that's cool, because I used to play football and stuff. But I looked at and go, but the punk rock guys, I was going, damn, I like that. And so that's kind of what got me going into the direction of music.
I don't know how we swung it, but me and Jim and Paul Hood were in charge of the record player in the lunchroom at Roosevelt High School. And so we would play what we wanted to play. You know, we played T-Rex and David Bowie and Lou Reed and Mick Ronson and, you know, all the stuff that we were into, Slade at the time. And there were days where, you know, somebody would come by. I remember one guy coming by with like a handful of pebbles, and he threw them at me, and they went inside this locker and they messed up the turntable and stuff. But there were days where we would put on a record and we would lock the door to the locker and we would leave, because we were like, you know, we don't give a fuck what the rest of Roosevelt High School thinks or says or does or wants, you know. But we all got beat up because we were whiz kids, you know.
What were your first memories of the Seattle scene? Would it be like the Lover Boys or TMT show or?
Well, probably hanging out with my friends Neil and Jim and Lee, putting together the District Diary and the Chatterbox.
Okay.
Because we went to see, you know, bands and we wanted to talk about bands.
What would you say was the overall music climate in '75 in Seattle?
The climate in Seattle, people, well, my friends, and we were pretty opinionated, we didn't like disco music very much. But we had friends who would have fake IDs and they'd go to the disco, so they'd like fill us in on all the music and all that stuff. But, you know, Patti Smith, I think, was doing something in '75. We were starting to hear about stuff, you know, we had to get our information from magazines in New York or London. It took a while for that information to get here, like Melody Maker. If you wanted Melody Maker, you had to wait a week, because that's how long it took to get there. But, you know, Patti Smith was somebody who influenced me a lot, and, you know, sort of a coming of age period, that's when I started writing, and you know, it's just, we had a sense that there were a lot of things in the world that, you know, no one had told you about growing up, and it was all coming at you, so we were interpreting that, and that sort of, that information informed us as to who we were going to become.
Yeah, the number of people, it was very small, and we were all sort of, you know, the outcasts at our own schools, our own high schools. And it's funny how, you know, I've thought about this many times, that, you know, I was an outcast, but I wanted to find other people to hang out with that were outcasts also. And somehow we'd all just sort of found each other. And, you know, the kids from Nathan Hale, like, you know, Kurt and Al Block, and, you know, Kim Warnick, the people that formed the Fastbacks. So actually, Kurt and Eric Warner went to Nathan Hale, and I don't remember how we crossed paths or how we met, but, you know, and it built that way. The Roosevelt kids met the Nathan Hale kids, and then they knew somebody that, you know, went to Ingram, or then there was, you know, and it just built that way. So it was pretty, the scene was pretty small at first.
Newspaper review of the TMT show called us punks, and so I don't know of any of us who felt like a punk, whatever a punk was at that time, you know. I mean, sure, maybe Richard Hell could be called a punk, Blondie maybe, but Ramones, you know, they were starting to come about, but I don't even, in '75 they weren't even really a thing. Patti Smith was a thing. We were reading about her and television.
But I remember when Tomata brought the first punk magazine. It was a cover, Lou Reed was on the cover, and it was the first punk magazine. That's when most people that I know of had ever heard the word, the term punk used in any sort of major way.
All the other shows were at like people's homes. Were there like, was there like the show house that everyone would go to, or is it like y'all were so young at that point that it was just like wherever you could?
Well, yeah, there weren't many. Usually where someone was rehearsing, there was this guy named Cam, and he had a house up by Ravenna, and the Mice played there. Other people played there. I think the Telepaths played there. But you know, whoever's house we could get away with playing at. Jim and I started playing, one of our first jam sessions was with Eldon Hoke from the Mentors, El Duce. And that was, I think I was 15 or 16. Okay. And then we formed the Love-A-Boy after that. With Jeff Cade and Dean Helgeson. Okay. We played our high school talent show. I mean, and for me, being in a band, I just had to express myself, you know, play music. My dad was an improviser. My sister was, you know, playing around the world. It was just something we had to do. And I think the people in our scene, it was the same way for each of them. They each of them had to say something out loud to the rest of the world. But for a couple of years, it was intense, and it was very creative, and everything's evolving, you know, and so all I can say is the thing that still works for me is music.
So, you were best friends with Jim growing up. Did y'all ever play music together beyond, like, once Jim got past flute and he started playing guitar or something, or?
Maybe we did this thing in 6th grade where we sang parody songs from Mad Magazine in our class as like a talent show or something. The weird thing was is I didn't play music. So my role in almost every part of what I was doing was not playing music on stage. I was behind the scenes, making posters, putting up posters, booking a hall, doing sound, taking tickets at the door, doing the lights, you know, breaking up fights, setting up gear, stuff like that, and all the way through. So, you know, whether it's writing in Chatterbox or my label Engram Records or, you know, other things, I was never a musician, and it's ironic because that's how I make my living now. Is I play the bagpipes. It's like, what? Bagpipes? So.
Was that like your first, and you mentioned the Led Zeppelin show, was the District Diary like your first like piece of work within the Seattle music scene, would you say? Like,
probably. I mean, you know, I was hanging out at the record stores on the Ave, and the District Diary was sitting on the counter, and, you know, I picked it up and, you know, opened it up, and, you know, these are, you know, Lee Lumsden's mom would mimeograph these for him at the place where she worked, and, you know, I don't know, he was probably standing in the record store, you know, while I was standing in the record store, and so we just started writing stuff, you know, buy an album and then write a review on it.
And we started to realize incorporating like New York over here, California down there, you know, we're alone up here, so, and we're kind of encompassing a little of everything, you know, and that's why I thought Seattle was more, you know, you could call something punk, but you couldn't tell necessarily except that it was different. You know, punks were different.
Sure.
And that's, we were on the outside.
Got it.
That was my feeling.
Obviously way before the internet, so it's like you have a certain amount of information to make a whole picture out of, and so I think with that comes a certain amount of, and correct me if I'm wrong, like being able to interpret the information you get in the way you want it to and creating your own style sort of from it, whereas today you have exactly to be this exact model of this exact person, so you can do 100 things that they're all doing to be 100% like them, whereas I could imagine back then you get a little bit of information from a magazine and go, oh, they're wearing this and they have this kind of attitude, well, I think that, but I also think this. I could see a more prevalence of that happening back then, whereas not today as much.
Sure, people were using their imaginations more.
You know, and of course Jim Bass and I played at the Bird, and he had a great band and is still awesome. He's still almost, you know, virtually unchanged in the last 45 years. We love Jim. You know, but was he a torchbearer of the punk bands to follow? No, he was a torchbearer of, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it exactly the way I want, and the, you know, the DIY spirit.
It was all friends that just sort of burgeoned out and
the
made more
Waterboys
friends.
concert was huge. It was like 3,000 people because Roosevelt High School was one of the biggest schools in the state because it was right in Seattle, and it was, I think the student body was about 3,800 at that time. So everybody in the school went to this assembly. It was like a talent show. It was like the Rubber Boys were just like one of the acts. It was a bunch of other acts, and none of them being musical. Like people, you know, I don't know what they were doing, variety of things. Like I was so into my own scene, I can't even remember who else. The amount of people that were there that liked it were like probably 10%. So maybe 300 kids out of those 3,000 kids thought this is cool. But a lot of them went on to do bands too. So it was kind of, it was like that.
Oh, Jim came over before too. We were talking about the Lover Boys concert at the talent show.
So at that show, I did lights and I tried to record this intro tape before, as the band was coming on stage, and I did this weird thing where I was using a tape that had already been used, and I recorded something else over top of it, and both of the things came out, and we were like, oh, this is even better. Like, it was a mistake, but it was even cooler. And then when I went to switch it on at the beginning of their show, something wasn't connected and it didn't play. So, but I remember trying to set up the lighting like the Spiders from Mars at a Hammersmith Odeon that we had seen on Midnight Special on TV or something. And so, yeah, I was helping those guys produce that show.
So I'm really curious to hear about your experience at the Lover Boys show, at the talent show at Roosevelt. What do you remember of that? Like,
I just remember that, you know, it seemed really cool that these kids that were obviously seniors, and I was like a freshman, were able to get up on stage and do a rock band that seemed, to me as a kid, seemed, you know, just as good as anything, really. You know?
Yeah.
And you're right there, you know, it's like I can't remember, I think it was after school or maybe at lunchtime or something.
yeah, I've read about that, and like that was like the first like introduction to glam into Roosevelt High School.
Well, I mean, they'd seen the kids all, you know, sort of glammed out, but yeah, I mean, I guess so. We kind of brought the house down. It was no one else was doing anything like that. We were only supposed to play one song, and I think it was Moon Age Daydream first, and then they said, play another one. So we did Alice Cooper's I'm 18. But I mean, it was so loud because we had rented gear, and the vice principal was running from one side of the stage to the other, turning us down, and so as soon as he took off the other way, I turned mine right back up again, you know. And I had borrowed a Telecaster, which sounded really thin, so it had to be loud in order for me to get any kind of feedback out of it.
Sure.
So yeah, and then at the end it was just, you know, like chorus of boos, people were throwing shit on stage. And then the next day, you know, in homeroom, everyone had to stay in homeroom an extra 10 or 15 minutes contemplating their bad behavior and rude behavior towards the other students trying to perform.
So did y'all get in trouble at all?
Well, Jim got, I think he got roughed up after the show, after school, something like that. So.
Yeah, I read he like painted like a big X on his chest or something.
Yeah.
And like the jocks or whatever weren't having it.
No, they didn't like it. Silver satin pants, you know, one sleeve shirt, you know, lots of glitter. Yeah.
But yeah, so basically that was a big show because that's where a lot of people sort of met each other and kind of connected on what this scene was about. And from that, this guy here, Jeff Cade, was at that show, and he went there, and he, you know, I met him and we talked about the doll show, and I met him at another glam rock show, I think it was Kiss at the Paramount, and him and his other high school friend Dean Helgeson, who was in the Lover Boys, the drummer. Dean had a car, so Dean was the one who drove Jeff around and stuff. And Paul and we used our parents' cars, so we met them there, and we decided we should start a band, you know. So we started a band shortly after that and kind of started practicing playing glam rock covers, and then we played that show at the Roosevelt High School, and you know, and so that was kind of, to me, that was kind of where that came from, was us kind of meeting each other by looking at the kind of records we were into, the kind of shows we would go to, and also the way we look, because everybody kind of try to look like some glam rocker. Some people would wear like the Bowie haircut. Some people would wear the, like I did with the Mark Bolan haircut. Some people would wear eye makeup. Some people would wear, you know, different kinds of clothes to kind of let everybody know that we weren't like stoners or jocks. We were whiz kids or whatever. We were, you know. And so we had this kind of thing going.
And like the impact that it had, I didn't realize that Roosevelt High School was so big that it was like 3,000 people potentially in attendance. Or at least that's what the total student body was or something
That was
like
the total student body. I don't know how many people the auditorium fit or how many were there, but anybody who wasn't in the auditorium at the time certainly was, you know, found out about it, and it was kind of scandalous because, you know, it was rock and roll, and it was kind of abrasive, and it pissed people off, and it was too loud, and, you know, it's like, well, what do you want? It's, you know, high school.
Yeah, and it was something totally new, like, from what I gather, like, most of the crowd was, like, filled with jocks who were not digging the whole glam thing, and that seemed to be it. Jim was talking about getting, like, roughed up after, or sometime thereabouts.
On New Year's Day, at the Moore Theater in 1976, was the first time that the Tupperwares played. They didn't actually play instruments. Tommy and Tomata and Rio just sang. And so there was the premiere of John Waters' movie, Pink Flamingos. And the Telepaths were the backing band for the Tupperwares, and they were billed to play before the movie started, midnight movie. And so I was running sound for that show. We had this shitty little PA system, and, you know, they did 3 songs. Ava Braun, I'm Going Steady with Twiggy, and Instamatic Fanatic. And Bill Rieflin and Eric Werner from the Telepaths wrote the music, and the band, you know, the Tupperwares guys wrote the lyrics. And so that event was before anything, so that was the first day of 1976.
So how long were the Lover Boys like a band, I guess?
Well, that was our only proper gig. So, you know, however long it took us to learn all the favorite Bowie, Iggy, Mott the Hoople songs we could, you know. And then, but the Mice started probably 6 months or so after that, maybe 9 months after that.
You know, some of the, what was Paul's first band? The Mice?
Yes.
M-E-Y-C-E, the Mice with Bass Night, I believe.
Yep.
Those guys were really, you know, trailblazers in the early days in terms of, you know, writing their own music and playing it out.
So, did the Mice go out and play like clubs or shows ever? Or
There were no clubs.
Oh, no clubs. Okay.
No clubs. No, we had to rent halls.
That's right. That's right. So the Mice's first show was at the TNT show.
Yeah.
How about after that? Like,
we played the IOOF hall, the IOGT hall, Freeway hall. We played all the halls.
Got it.
You know, we didn't play Washington Hall, but I think the Telepaths did. But so, you know, it was basically just, you know, they stopped letting us do shows because people would bring alcohol in.
Then Mice went on to do a bunch of shows with the Telepaths and do a handful of other shows with other bands, like Uncle Cookie was a band that was playing around. We did a show at the Neptune Theater, which is now a pretty big, serious concert venue, but we may have been the first band to play there, us and Uncle Cookie, when they built the stage just for, they were going to do try to do a consistent theme of concerts with all ages concerts after the movies, like in the middle of the night on weekend nights, and it never got off the ground because I guess, I don't know whether the permitting or the curfew laws or some stupid thing like that, but they built this stage, and they're you know, after that stage, there's still a stage, I don't know if it's any part of that old stage, but there's still a stage that they do major concerts there now. So it was a movie theater, like I said, some Beatles movies there and stuff, but you know, we did that show. It was like a late night show with Uncle Cookie, and a lot of people came down to the show. and a lot of whom were musicians that were working, that were maybe a few years older than us because we weren't old enough to really work in bars. But a lot of the musicians I later grew up to know that were working in the clubs, that were sort of more creative, on the creative side, came down to that show and were pretty inspired by the Mice. And they said, well, we could write songs. And among those were, Steve Pearson from the Heats, later it was the Heats, and Bruce Hazen, who was a good friend of mine who plays in this more recent version, updated review of the Moberlys, and a number of other kids, and I think Ken Deans from the Heats was there too.
So what was it like playing with Duff? Like, what was he like as like a friend, as a musician?
Yeah, so we played Little League Baseball, Little League Basketball and stuff. Mm-hmm. This another friend of ours, Andy Fortier, big in our lives, and he played drums in quite a few other bands and stuff. Duff was the reason why I played. One day we went over to his house and we all shaved our heads off, and he started showing me how to play the bass. As a person, great guy. We just got along. He came from a family of 13 kids, so he kind of knew how to get along with everybody. He was the youngest. I was the youngest, and I had 3 older brothers. So it was kind of like just great. You go over to his house. His mom is so nice, and music-wise, his family, it was in. His oldest brother played with Kenny Loggins and stuff, and his brother Matt was went to school to be a music teacher. They had music in their blood. He was. I don't think Duff could have done anything else except music. He was, and that was his thing. He's a super smart guy, but back then we were just dumb, crazy kids, But those guys could play.
No, I went to Roosevelt High School in the north end of Seattle. I was at high school with Chris Utting. You may have interviewed him. Duff McKagan. My sister knew the guy from Motley Crue, who went there for a while. Apparently it was kind of rock and roll high school,
It's a rock and roll town.
Yeah. But, I really got it, I was into Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd like everybody else until punk rock came out. And then all of a sudden, there were all these people you knew that are in bands, and you're thinking like, I could be in a band, and there's all these shows everywhere that were mostly back then, they were all in kind of rental union halls and stuff like that, and Monroe's Dance Center, and all these kind of places.
Hall, UTC Hall.
Yeah.
Washington Hall.
Washington Hall, yeah. They were all like
2 or 3 more.
There were, until the Metropolis came along, where somebody actually had a place. But anyway, no. When I was in high school, that's kind of how I started getting into that, and the other guy in the band that's not with us anymore, Tim. Him and his brother and I used to practice music all the time, and we thought we were going to start a punk rock band. We used to go down to Showbox and see all the see Devo and 999, Ultravox, and I saw the Clash and the Ramones and Blondie and just all those kind of those late 70s punk rock bands when I was in high school, and yeah, I liked, so I got a guitar, started trying to figure out, play music and see if I could find any friends that wanted to do it. And anyway, that's kind of how I got started in it.
And then, so I played for about 2 years, and I discovered sex and drugs and rock and roll, and sold my bagpipes, and actually bought a bunch of weed, and kind of went into business, and so.
Awesome. That's rock and roll.
Entrepreneur.
There you go, from the start.
Yeah. We didn't know any better. We just did things, you know. Lee Lumsden and I with Chatterbox magazine, we were the District Diary. We would just show up outside the back door of the Paramount and the stage entrance and wait until, you know, whoever it was walked out, because we would try to call their management, or the people would go, "You're who? No, you can't have an interview, you know, with John Entwistle or Ray Davies, or, you know." And then we would stand outside the back door and they'd go, "Oh, yeah, sure, come on back to the Edgewater with us." And, you know, we would sit there and interview those guys, and sometimes just hang out and, you know, shoot the shit and party. And, you know, so we didn't know any better. We just said, let's go do an interview with Blue Oyster Cult or whoever it was, you know. And, you know, when I booked the Ramones at the Olympic Hotel, it was 6 days before they were supposed to be in town. And I finally got a hold of their tour agent, and I said, nobody is going to be up at Parker's Ballroom who cares about this band, because none of us are over 21. We can't legally get into that place. And he said, if you can find a better place, if you can find a place to have the show, you can do the show. And so, you know, me and Robert Bennett got on the phone, and we wound up in the Olympic Hotel on a Sunday night. And, you know, we were just ballsy.
Yeah, from what I understand is, I don't know if it was Lee or Neil or what, but they convinced the hotel that it was like some kind of Mexican, the Ramon Brothers or something. It was some kind of like
a folk group, I've been told.
Yeah, it was like they said it was like a Mexican folk act or something. It was like a cultural kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And it was fucking Ramones. And like, I don't know, you know, I mean, everybody in the world probably says they were there now when they weren't. There's probably a couple hundred kids there or something, but they came up, oh man, I was, oh God, that hotel didn't know what the hell, didn't know what the hell.
So there was this radio station called KILO, Kilo, and at the time, radio stations were a little more responsible about doing that community service thing. And I knew that they had to provide X amount of free spots, free commercial spots to nonprofit groups to comply with the FCC rule about, you know, community involvement or whatever they called it. And so I called up Kilo and said, hi, I'm from the Telepathic Foundation, you know, and we're having this concert, and this was actually at a hall up in Shoreline, and I forget the name of the hall, but it was a Telepaths concert. And you know, I was on the phone with the guy at Kilo making up this complete cock and bull story about the Telepathic Foundation so that we could get free air spots. Now, I don't know how many people heard the spot and came to the show as a result of that, but I mean, that's just the kind of stuff we did, was like just make shit up and hope that it helped us, you know, get more attendance at the show.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
And it was all that attitude of, we can do this.
Played in a band called Avant-Garde. Yeah, I think it was called Avant-Garde. That was the first band I played with Duff. Duff McKagan, I grew up with him. We lived about 3 or 4 blocks from each other, and his older brother was my age. So elementary school, his name's Matt. So Matt McKagan and I used to play together after school, and Duff would hang around, kind of tag along. He was about 2-3 years younger, so that was a big difference when you're in elementary school. So I didn't hang out with Duff as much until later, but we got back in touch in high school, and you know, we started playing in bands again. And not again, but for the first time we started playing in bands, and one of them was Avant-Garde. And that band, I was with Garth Brandenburg, who's in the Moonspinners now, but he was in YBGB and the Chubby Children and a bunch of other bands back in the 80s. And he and I were like best friends, and so we had we were the rhythm section, me on drums, Garth on guitar, Duff on bass, and then a guy named Mark Twite on vocals, who became, I guess, a pretty world-renowned mountain climber eventually. He didn't stick with the music. He was a real character. The Mentors were, I used to see them practice before they even had the concept of rape rock. They were influenced by the fusion prog music as well as heavy metal, Sabbath and that kind of stuff. And they just blended the two together. And then Duce was, he was all into, horror and porn. So he put the two together and came up with the Mentors, and that was it. They wore the black executioner's hoods and came up with rape rock and became one of the most notorious bands, in the Northwest. The thing about me getting into punk rock, it really gave me something to focus on. By '79, I started playing in a band called The Radios. That was my first, what I consider, professional band. So The Radios lasted for a little while. That was with, Kim Warnick played bass in The Radios. That was her first band too, I think, before the Fastbacks even. So The Radios, that was exciting. I was playing drums, but I wanted to play guitar in bands too, so that's when the next year, I guess 80, late 79, early 80, started playing with Duff and Andy again, and Andy was the drummer, Andy Fortier, and we started the Veins, and that was my name, idea, spelling it V-A-I-N-S, because influenced by people like Billy Idol, you figure, well, all rock stars are vain, let's play on that, so we call ourselves the Veins. And the band only did about, half a dozen shows. It was only together for a few months, but was together long enough to put out this 45, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And my daughter made these for my birthday, so I thought I'd bring them down and get a good picture of the Veins cover. But the cover's classic, I gotta say. It's got the 3 action hits, so it's a 3-song EP, Veins on the top, and these were taken from comic books. So You May Not Believe in Veins, and then down here are the names of the songs. The Loser, he was a blood-lusting fiend who preys on girls. And that was one of the songs. That song, The Loser, was about Mike Refuser, who was the leader of a band called The Refusers, and they were friends of mine. As a matter of fact, before the Veins became the Veins, we were in a band with Mike Refuser, and he was taking a break from the Refusers, and we started this band called the Thankless Dogs, and we did that for a little while, but Mike got back together with the Refusers, and we were just kind of mad at him about that, so we started our own band, the Veins, and wrote a song about him, and it's kind of a legendary song now at this point, notorious. And then this one, School Jerks, that's the long one on the A side. Well, I don't really know if it's an A side, because they're both A sides as far as I'm concerned. But School Jerks, and these guys are helpless captives in the nightmares of youth. and then the song that Duff wrote was called The Fake, and he says he hunted humans, and it was in Panacolor. The face was the thing without a face. Oh no, the fake, excuse me, was the thing without a face. Anyways, just trying to do some goofy stuff on a cover that did pretty well. The single, we made 1,000 of them, and the band played a notorious show that we did with Black Flag.
The band The Veins, who was Duff McKagan, Andy Fortier, and Chris Crass. And they were ambitious kids too, and they're like they ended up making a killer 45 as well.
Music. So I didn't even request it. It was like unsolicited. Everybody stuff. Wanted Duff, and then people I'd never talked to going away from one band, they would be upset that they lost records and so on.
Sabotage the next one.
So I ended up making a lot of connections. during that time with musicians and bands all over the Northwest.
There was a song about Mike Refuser.
Until,
Like
the band
yeah,
the loser.
Yeah.
Refuser, you loser.
Yeah.
I could take
that type of
all these contacts that I
kind
had.
of-
You'd think he would be offended
And
by
kind of
that,
shift
but
from
I heard from another person,
being a journalist writing
who
about
lived in a
music
house with him, that he had a
proud
copy
of
of
actually
that
putting
band
on
single
shows,
on his
booking
fireplace mantle
So I
for
started
years.
to do that.
So I guess he was
spring of
proud of it.
'84.
Yeah.
And there was some
I mean,
overlap for a
to
while.
be the subject of
where
one
I was
of one of 3
doing
songs
both.
on an EP that's so
until I got
legendary.
caught.
And so he had a band with Andy Fortier and Chris Utting called The Veins. And so I saw those guys play, and they had a single. So we were like, wow, God damn, you guys got a single. And Chris had a PA that he got on some deal at American Music. So he got recording time. And so, I mean, that was big. That was a big thing back then, you know. You have a single, oh my God. And then
we played it at the Washington Hall up on Capitol Hill, and it was really an amazing show. Veins opened, Black Flag played, they played, and there was somebody while they were playing that had cut his wrist. Oh, and it was the headliner was supposed to be the Subhumans from Vancouver, BC, but because some of their entourage came down from BC, one of the guys in a band called the Bludgeon Pigs, he cut his wrist and was up on stage, you know, being crazy and everything, and the fire department came, and next thing you know, the show, Black Flag got to play, but the show got shut down. So the Subhumans never even got to play, which is really a shame. But they must have liked the flyer for the show, because they ended up putting the flyer on the back of their first album. And so, you know, it kind of immortalized that show by putting that flyer on their album. So the Veins, you know, we played for a while, and I was kind of a slave driver. I was like the leader of the band, and I think the reason we probably broke up is because the other guys wanted to just have more fun. So they started a band with a couple of other guys that I had been in a band with called The Missing Link. That was a 4-piece. I played drums, Johnny Vineham played guitar, Jeff Larson on bass, and John Conti on vocals. That was called The Missing Link, and that band, like so many other bands, just lasted for a few months and did a few shows. And but I think that Duff and Andy from the Veins wanted to have some fun, so they just started this band called Cleavage. So it was like a joke band, and they didn't do that for very long. But you know, I wished them luck, and they went off and did that. So I was playing drums in these local bands. One was called The Max, which was made up of a couple of brothers, Colin and Angus McDonald, and they had started the band before I joined and put out a 7-inch single, which you have, and then their drummer left and I joined, and then it started getting pretty serious. We got Johnny Vineham again. There he is. I was in a bunch of bands with him. He joined on keyboards, and we did some shows, some pretty good shows, opening for some decent bands. Can't remember the bands we opened for, but I think we opened up for a couple of national acts down at the Showbox and places like that. God, the Max was a really good band. People thought that band was going to go places. Well, Patrick McDonald, he really liked that Max song. He called it the best song on the album. So that was pretty nice to read that.
By this point, Chris had joined the Max band, or the Max. People called them the Max band, but the actual name was the Max. And I really liked them. I had seen them. I think I saw them open for the Ramones, but I'd seen them a few times, and I really thought they really had sort of an original sound. Chris, at that point, they were a 3-piece, and they'd been a 3-piece all along. They started out with a different drummer. It was Colin and his brother Angus, and a drummer named Neil in the beginning, And it may have gone back further than that. They may have had other people, but at the time that I started seeing them play, it was like these three. And then at some point, Chris took over on drums. So anyway, after Cleavage fell apart, Chris was playing in the Max, and he asked me if I wanted to play keyboards in the Max, and I said, well, I don't really play keyboards. I have a synthesizer, but I just sort of fiddle around on it, and they were like, well, that's perfect. We don't want someone who's like a Rick Wakeman or something. We just want like sort of atmospheric sounds. And I was like, okay, I can do that. So I joined the Max, and that was pretty fun. I mean, I would just do very simple stuff on the synthesizer to sort of augment what they already had. And Colin was always coming up with new songs. And then we did, after I'd been in the band, I was probably only in the band for maybe like 2 or 3 months when we went in and recorded I'm 37. And then we recorded 2 other songs that were going to be on a single, which were the 2 unreleased songs that I gave you. Yeah, so that was intended to be a single, but I think there may have been like some friction between Colin and Chris, or maybe Colin. It was hard with Colin to tell what he was thinking or what he wanted to do at times. But I mean, he was a great songwriter, and I thought a great singer and a very creative guitar player. But he, you know, sometimes could be kind of moody. But at the end of 1980, in fact, I think it was maybe like New Year's Eve, like Colin came up to me and told me the band was breaking up because he decided to join this other band called Three Swimmers, which was Mark Smith, who'd been in the Beakers, and George Romancic, I think, was the drummer. He was from the Beakers, and then this other bass player guy, whose name I can't remember. But anyway, I thought it was a mistake to break up the band because we were starting to get quite a bit of attention. Like, I mean, locally, there was we did an interview in the Rocket that was going to be like a big feature article. You know, it was like a pretty long interview, and they ended up not running it because we broke up before they ran the article. So, and you know, we just done these recordings, which we were pretty happy with, and Colin had more new songs, and I thought things were kind of moving along, but it sort of fell apart.
And they went on to, Colin, the leader of that band, McDonald, he went on to another band called the Three Swimmers, which ended up, they recorded it and did a little tour with Gang of Four, and yeah, so I was in these art bands. I was in the Little Bears from Bangkok, which we did this compilation cassette of our songs, and I played on at least a couple songs on that. That was a really fun band. We played some shows, and like out-of-town shows. That was a pretty good scene, you know. We could go to Olympia, we could go to Bellingham, we could go to you know, Vancouver, and so we didn't always have to play in Seattle and the surrounding area. But yeah, so the Little Bears did a little stuff, and I played, you know, drums in that, and that was pretty cool. We had 2 bass players and guitar, and then eventually Sean O'Neill joined, and he's another local legend who unfortunately died, I think it was last year, maybe a year before, of cancer, and he, really great guy. He put out a solo album, and he joined the Little Bears and played keyboards in the band. So those were a couple of arty type bands that I played in that were rock, but had art influences. I ran into him at a house party, and I said, Duff, you know, I have this idea for a new punk rock band. By this time, so this is probably 81, and by this time hardcore had gotten so big, it was almost sort of taking over the national punk rock scene. And I wanted to do something that was maybe throwback to the British, more melodic, anthemic punk rock bands. And I even had a name. I said, Duff, we should start a band, and we can call it The Living, something positive. And you know, it's a double meaning. You know, we want to make a living if we can off it, and it's the living. We're alive. We're not into a death trip. And I said, Duff, you know, I think maybe the clincher was because Duff was like me. He was playing drums and guitar. Oh, and well, I'm gonna have to backtrack a little bit, but I'll just finish talking about The Living. So The Living, I talked Duff into it. I said, Duff, you know, why don't we do this band and we can switch off guitar and drums? Because Duff was playing drums and guitar in bands at the time. And he stopped playing bass, I think. He wasn't really playing much bass. After, I don't know why he stopped, but maybe more in demand as a guitar player. And so we started this band, The Living. Was me on drums and guitar, and then Duff on drums and guitar. We switched off on songs he wrote, he'd play guitar. I play drums. The ones I wrote, I play guitar and he'd play drums. We had a guy that never played bass before, never been in a band, named Todd Fleischman. We got him. He was our buddy. We just thought he looked the part. He looked like a punk jock rock Sid Vicious. You know, the guy was filled. He was into weightlifting and karate and everything. He just had the right attitude. So we got him going on the bass, and before you know it, he picked stuff up pretty good. So I guess Kim Warnick did play in the band for one gig. I'd forgotten that, but she reminded me of that the other day. So, but for some reason she didn't work out, and that's when we got Todd Fleischman. So it was me, Todd, and then John Conti again, who had been with me in The Missing Link. He was the singer. And The Living was a pretty good band. We got some decent gigs. We did some live recordings. We went up to BC, we played with DOA, we stayed overnight with him. Shithead was very gracious. He was a really great host. And I remember we played at this place. What the hell was it called? It was something like the Chinese Garden or something like that. And so should I stop or just keep talking?
No, just keep talking.
And yeah, we played up there, and I'd forgotten my drumsticks, and so I had to borrow some drumsticks from Chuck Biscuits, the DOA's drummer, who's one of the best drummers of all time to come out of the punk scene.
I never knew how to play at all, but my friend Duff showed me how to play some notes, and next thing you know, I'm playing it in a band after 2 weeks of getting a bass. So
there you go.
That's crazy, but.
And what was that
awesome.
band?
That band was called The Living, and that's how I got my eyes opened up on everything. That band opened my eyes to music and just loving it. Just seriously, it blew my mind because, you know, the days of My Sharona and stuff like that just went to the wayside, you know. I was called a punk rock jock stoner kind of deal. It's like too many titles, but it's like you're not supposed to. So the people that played sports didn't like that punk rock stuff, but I loved it. I thought it was totally liberating because like when the disco thing was going on, I was like, there's no way you're putting me in polyester. It ain't happening. There was this band with Scott Dittman, the Cheaters and stuff. I saw those guys play, and it kind of blew my mind. I went, wait a minute, this is kind of fun. And then in 1979, this is Seattle's, I call it Seattle's Woodstock. Because all these people said they went to the Clash in 79 at Paramount. There is no way, because it was like, no way. I knew everybody who was there. You were not there. It was the loudest concert in the world. So people would take cigarette butts, and we take the the cotton and shove it in our ears because it was so loud. And they didn't have the balcony wasn't open, but everybody that I ever knew was there at that show. So it was kind of funny, because the next day people missed the bus because they couldn't hear their alarm because their ears were ringing. I was like, my ears were ringing the next day and stuff. And that moment, I went, man, punk rock's, it's my thing. I love it. Yeah.
So how did the living come to be?
That's a great question. Well, so Duff McKagan and Chris Hutting, they started the band, and then they got John Conte, who is the singer and stuff. And the bass player was kind of up, because Kim Warnick of the Fastbacks played in that band for a brief moment, and then they plucked me out of the sky and threw me in the mix, and next thing you know, I'm playing shows. It was like, okay, and so I had to learn quickly because the bar was set super high. And at the beginning, Chris and Duff were switching from drums to guitar, back and forth, while I was playing bass, and John Conte played rhythm guitar and stuff. But when there was kind of a little falling out, then Chris moved on, and we picked up Greg Gilmore, who played in Mother Love Bone. That guy could play drums. So he was like, he raised the bar. This guy was Mr. King Crimson. I can play drums with anybody, and he could. He is that good, and just lifted the bar way up, and that's when the band started to really get full steam. It was like we were kind of young, so we couldn't really get into the bars and stuff, so that kind of held us back a bit. We played the all ages shows, and people wanted to kill punk rockers, and it ended up pretty crazy half the time. But now I look back and laugh a lot because it was just insane. It was insane.
How long did the living last?
I thought it lasted a long time, but I don't think that we lasted over a year or a year and a half. It kind of just, we were like skyrocketing up, and then we started having kind of this problem. Our lead singer was starting to want to take charge and do everything else, and then we were like, well, we're kind of like trying to go in a different direction, and it just kind of stopped. For me, I was like, okay, I'm in the band. Next thing you know, Duff and Greg Gilmore are in this band called 10 Minute Warning, and it was pretty much over. But then all of a sudden, I'm playing bass for the Scilla Killers, so just kind of like moved over to that direction. So sometimes, and I wasn't even mad at those guys or anything. We were still best as buddies. It just things happen. And you don't even really know why, because everybody's kind of busy in their own little bubble and stuff. It just disappeared. But we had some great shows, and people were just like, yeah. And then the next thing you know, boom, it's done. It stopped.
What were some of the best shows?
We had, the Monroe's Dance Palace was probably one of my favorite shows. It was super duper hot, and the stage was so high that you only had like maybe a foot clearance or so. So when you jumped up in the air, your heads were going through the ceiling and stuff, and that one was my favorite show. But we had another one. downtown at an art gallery that we played the Ballroom Blitz, and that place just erupted. It just went nuts. Really great show, and I didn't know it, but it was our last show, and it was so good. It was probably a great ending, and the fastbacks were on the outs, and then they were on the ends, and they played that show, and but yeah, it was I think the Monroe's Dance Palace. There was a lot of people, and there is a photograph of all these people that you're going, wow, that we're all kind of intertwined on that. I'd like to get that picture to you, because it's something else. I mean, fastbacks, 10-minute warning, the living, just a lot of people of the music scene were in that photograph. Man, I see it now, but I don't have it on my phone.
That's okay. Sure.
It was.
So what clubs were you playing, and what were like the other bands that were a part of the scene?
Well, okay, the clubs that we did get to play in, there was this place called the Borderline that was downtown Seattle. We played at the Rex, which ended up being the Vogue, and we played at the Harvard Exit in between this filming the Beatles and stuff like that. We played on an Argosy cruise one time, and they had beer and that in a keg, so that was a problem because we were like, you have beer. There's going to be some drinking, and we played at the Smiling Buddha up in Canada with DOA, and there was a really cool place, Monroe's Dance Palace. It's like almost to going to Queen Anne, and that's where a ton of bands played, and that was a really good place. Played at art galleries like this one called Ground Zero and stuff.
I got the record that came out somewhat recently of that re-released material, or was it ever released?
No, so we recorded it at American Music, and we had tapes, and we kept on getting some record deal, and then the lead singer, bam, chop it down, scare the crap out of the people, turned it down. Then there was a place, guys in Portland, Oregon, ready to release it, and he shot that to pieces. We even had a chance to be on Sub Pop. He blew it up. And then, so I was like, I'm done, I'm exhausted. He really wanted the band to get back together. It wasn't gonna happen. Greg Gilmore, love the guy to death. He talked to Stoney, I never pronounce his name right, from Pearl Jam, and who had the Loose Groove, his record label, and he listened to it, listened to the tapes and stuff, and goes, I'm doing it. And man, it was so great, and the video, and they had a couple videos, but it was fun, man. I was like, wait a minute, that picture of me is from the Silly Killers, not from the Living, but they put it up, but it captured the moment of Seattle, I think, and it really brought me joy, because I was like, that was a great part of my life, and when that got released, they wrote, there was like 23 different magazines it was written up, which my parents would have just died. My mom would have bought every single one. And then the write up in the Times. So that was good. I mean, you know, for me, it wasn't about money or anything, but it was about, at least we got our stamp on the, you know, that we were part of something. And I felt really good about it. And I was really happy that those guys did that. We're so giving. I mean, you know, Greg was Mother Love Bone, gets a record contract, and then 6 months later, Andrew's dead. That's over with. It's like, bam. I mean, wow. So how fleeting these moments are. I mean, 1 minute you're going like this, next minute, like, boom, it just falls out. So anybody who makes it, like Duff made it, hey man, it's by chance. Mike McCready, you know him, right? Well, he lived 4 houses away from me in Lowhurst. And he used to come and watch us play before he went out. And this guy, Danny Newcomb, he lived right across the street from me. So, and he was he's a great guitar player and stuff. So it's just, it was around, and I never thought I was going to play music. I thought I was going to play football somewhere. So that kind of stuff. And I'm so glad I did. I mean, it was awesome. So
what, did you ever go to the Metropolis? Did you ever go?
Oh yes. Yes, indeed. Played there with the Silly Killers.
Okay. When were the Silly Killers active?
They're probably active 1981, and I think by 85 it started to decline. And Eddie left the band probably 83 or so, and then I picked up where he left off, and then Gary Kluge went from playing bass to lead singer, and that was hilarious because he would make these posters with Pat Benatar in bondage and have the Silly Killer logo and stuff, and then we had shows with the Refusers and stuff like that. So we had a few women's groups that weren't too happy with the Silly Killers, but they were like, whatever. It was a really, really funny. Gary was so funny because one time he got porno magazines, and he would just tear out a page and then read it while we're playing and using it for lyrics and stuff. I mean, just crazy stuff like that. And we would just do it. One time we played this show in Kirkland. God, I cannot remember the name of the place, but they thought we were a heavy metal band, and they go, Silly Killer, and they go, no, Silly Killers. And so we weren't heavy metal at all. We come out there and they just were booing us, and we were loving it. So we were just like playing, and it was like a Parker's kind of place, but I cannot for the life of me remember what the name of the place was. But they had great sound, so we sounded awesome, totally powerful. But we were a punk rock band playing with heavy metal bands, so they were like, you know, we're not going to play a bunch of scales for you now. We'll give you some power chords maybe, but oh man, what fun! What